You keep leaving the second it stops feeling like a movie, and calling every person after that wrong for you, when the actual problem sitting quietly across every one of your failed relationships is you. On the day they lowered the casket, the widow didn't cry. She just stood there, jaw tight, watching the dirt hit the wood, thud, thud, thud. 40 years of dishes. 40 years of arguing about money and forgetting to lock the door. 40 years of a love that, on any given Tuesday, looked exactly like nothing at all. That flat, unglamorous stretch of years breaks people because it doesn't match the story we were sold. We were told love feels like fire, and when the fire burns down to something that just sits there, warm and low, we assume it went out. So we go looking for the next fire, driven by a hunger that never fills up. But the widow wasn't hungry, she was gutted, because the paradox is this: the fire was never the love, the ash was. What's left standing after everything burns off is the only part that was ever true. Let's start with the logic, because logic is where most people feel safest when their chest feels empty. Here's the first brutal truth nobody wants to admit. You didn't develop these unrealistic ideas about love on your own. They were fed to you frame by frame by a machine you never asked to be trained by. Every proposal video engineered to make you cry. Every vlog of a couple filming their sweetest 3 minutes and editing out the other 23 hours of mundane reality. Every movie that rolls the credits right at the altar because nobody wants to sit in the theater and watch the part where love gets boring, sick, or terrified. You aren't weak for expecting fireworks. You are a victim of marketing. You were targeted by an algorithm profiting off you feeling like your real Tuesday night relationship is defective compared to a highlight reel. Society commodified the spark, turning it into a metric of success. If you don't feel the rush, culture tells you you're settling. Selling the illusion that perpetual excitement is a right rather than a biological impossibility. This isn't a character flaw, it is chronic exposure to a toxic narrative. And exposure can be fixed, but only if you look at the machinery behind the curtain. Now let's look at the hardware inside your skull. Your brain runs on dopamine, and its only job is to chase novelty. New faces, new validation, new rushes. It fires when your phone lights up or when you feel that hollow drop before a first kiss. Fast, overwhelming, and strictly temporary. Dopamine was never built to carry the weight of a 40-year marriage. It exists merely to keep two strangers interested long enough for something sustainable to take over. That slower mechanism is oxytocin. It is significantly less flashy. It's tied to routine, to the quiet safety of sitting across the same table from the same face for 1,000 mornings. Oxytocin doesn't explode. It builds up, millimeter by millimeter. It functions less like a firework and more like scar tissue. It might be ugly at first, but it is the only thing that actually holds the wound shut. So when the dopamine inevitably fades, and it always fades, people panic. They call that biological shift falling out of love. In reality, they are just standing at the exact threshold where their brain is attempting to switch chemical systems. Because nobody taught them to read the dashboard, they think silence means the engine died. It usually means the journey is starting. Here is the cycle almost everyone runs on repeat. The spark fades, the silence creeps in, panic sets in. You blame the other person for changing. You blame yourself for settling. You blame compatibility. So you break it off. You burn it down. You go out and meet someone new. You feel the spark again simply because it's novel. And mistake that chemical rush for proof that this one is the one. You think you finally solved the puzzle. Then, 18 months later, it happens again. The same fade, the same creeping silence, the same panic, the same messy exit. I lived inside that loop for years. I left something good once because it got quiet, and I confused quiet for dead. It wasn't dead. It had just graduated past the fireworks stage, and I didn't have the emotional map to understand that this was normal. I chased the high somewhere else, only to find out the high was never the point. I am not telling you this from a podium. I'm telling you this from the wreckage. The mechanical fix for this is significantly less exciting than you want it to be. Oxytocin bonding isn't instant, and it cannot be hacked. It builds through repeated, entirely unremarkable contact. It's the same hand held during a bad diagnosis. It's the person who shows up on a gray Tuesday when nothing is wrong except existence feels heavy. Attachment research has proven for decades that trust and pair bonding strengthen through friction and time, not intensity. Real bonding is 100,000 small, forgettable moments stacked relentlessly on top of each other. Now let's step outside the clinical sterility of the lab and look at the metaphysical frame. Logic and biology explain the mechanism, but fail to explain why pain must be part of the equation. Why does love carry this shadow? Almost every major philosophical and religious tradition, from the stern writings of the ancient Stoics to Buddhist teachings on impermanence, to centuries of theology regarding grief, lands on the exact same deeply uncomfortable idea. Suffering is not a punishment, it is a forge. They didn't have fMRI scans, but they watched people survive profound loss and noticed the exact pattern science is only now quantifying. The people who loved the hardest were invariably the ones who had already survived losing something irreplaceable. This isn't because pain is inherently good. It is because pain is the ultimate proof that you let something inside your walls deep enough to actually matter. Call it God or the indifferent universe. Something about being alive insists on a toll. You cannot get the deep, anchor-like version of love without agreeing, somewhere very quiet inside your soul, to risk the deep, world-ending version of loss too. They are two sides of the exact same coin. And if that idea is sitting heavy on your chest right now, making it slightly harder to breathe, good. That is the correct reaction. Here is the epiphany that changes everything if you actually let it bypass your defenses and land. If the universe handed you the deep, legendary love you claim to want today before you built any capacity to sit with loss, it would destroy you. You would panic the very first time the room got quiet. You would actively sabotage the relationship the first time it demanded sacrifice instead of simply handing you a dopamine rush. People do not fail at love because true love is incredibly rare. People fail because they go wandering into the deep end looking for it before they have built the stomach for what it inevitably costs. I found that out the hard way with someone I almost lost to an illness that materialized out of thin air. I remember sitting in a fluorescent waiting room, completely stripped of control. I couldn't negotiate. I couldn't fix it. And in that crushing helplessness, a realization washed over me. I wasn't scared of losing the excitement. I wasn't grieving the loss of passion. I was terrified of losing her. Full stop. That was the first time I recognized that what I felt wasn't a chemical high anymore. A chemical high shatters under pressure. This survived the absolute worst news I had ever received. That's when the truth finally clicked into place. The paralyzing fear of loss I was experiencing wasn't a symptom of love failing. It was the receipt for it. I had bought the real thing, and this was the price. So here's the antidote, and it is smaller and less glamorous than you think. Forget fixing the entirety of your relationship this week. Forget the cinematic gesture or the ultimatum. Just pick one single moment today to sit in the boring, unglamorous, frustrating version of your person. Make the coffee without asking for credit. Sit through the story you've already heard 4 times and actually listen. Hold their hand during the mundane appointment that isn't even that serious. Stop chasing a phantom spark. Just lay down one more small, heavy brick of the thing that isn't exciting but is relentlessly real. That's it. That is the entire assignment. One brick, not a whole wall. And if you need undeniable proof that this isn't just a nice, poetic idea, look at anything in nature that grows roots instead of just blooming fast. A weed shoots up overnight, frantic and green, and dies out completely by the end of the season. An oak tree takes decades, buried in the absolute dark, building a massive root system that nobody ever sees, long before it is strong enough to survive a violent storm without splitting in half. Nature doesn't run the experiment differently. Fast growth breaks easily, slow growth holds. So if your relationship feels quiet right now, that is not proof you failed. That is not proof the love is gone. You are not behind. You were never in a race to begin with. You're just standing in the part of love that was always going to ask more of you than butterflies ever did. I'll be here for the rest of it, so stick around.